starts off arguing this is the best it's ever been. All the the world is not a dumpster fire. While the news makes it look like all these things are terrible, that's how they have to be in order to compete and sell news. Whereas statistics show that more people are healthier, living longer, wealthier, fewer children are in poverty. I mean, there's still plenty, of course, but when you look at overall counts and everything, all that stuff. However, his goal is to that's I should show you. But what makes everything better is knowledge, enlightenment, and specific kinds. The kind that started with Kant, with that time period, that basically led to progress. And it's kind of interesting to me that progress also seems to today be viewed as a code word for white supremacy.
What is viewed as it what?
Progress.
Progress is viewed
as a code word for white supremacy.
By
Because
all people or by certain people?
by liberals that have gotten to the point where they look back and they say any kind of collusion between science and social progress is attached to Northern European, Western, Caucasian ethnic philosophies, right? And that says we're the best. And so you see that kind of impetus. I mean, that's a lot like Hitler, the Aryan race, which is totally bonkers. There's no such thing. But at the same time, the idea that the Third Reich would be basically the kingdom of, God, in a way, on earth. The Catholic Church actually did, they approved and signed contracts with Mussolini, which is, by the way, how they got the Vatican.
Oh, really?
Yes.
The Vatican is that new? I don't know what
Well, I
level
mean,
I was thinking it was.
Historically, of course, Rome actually had a lot more, but at a certain point, the Pope lost his secular power to the various kingdoms and empire. I'm not sure, how much of it. Spain, the Holy Roman Empire, and the Pope wasn't in charge of it. He was still the Bishop of Rome, but then during Mussolini's reign, in order for Mussolini to get the Pope's approval of his control of the country and ideas that he was trying to put forth, he agreed to yield the area that became the actual country of the Vatican to the Pope. So is an interesting kind of biography of the two, Mussolini and the Pope, that does the same thing. Talks about that. That's it, if you're curious about that sort of thing. Well, so today we're doing a token feminist philosopher. Actually, strictly speaking, she's not feminist because the word hadn't been invented yet. However, apart from Hypatia, another one that we really should talk about is the one that corresponded with Leibniz, Anne Conway, Lady Conway. We didn't talk about her at all, did we? We're talking about Leibniz. We really had time enough. She apparently, in one of her letters to Leibniz, was the first one to use the concept of monad. So, when you're looking at the guys getting all the credit, even for things that women came up with, like Watson and Crick, the double helix, right? The one who did all the work was the woman in the lab.
Was it her name, Rose or something?
I don't remember.
That's, yeah, exactly. You don't.
Yeah. I mean, we remember the lady who, with her husband, discovered radioactivity
Marie Curie.
Yeah.
because, we've got the measurement is actually in Curie's, but also because her lab notes are still radioactive. That's kind of famous.
Didn't she win a Nobel Prize?
Yes, but I think she was dead by then.
Oh.
And I've seen her crypt. Her husband and her are in a crypt in, I think, like one of the palaces in France. It's just a room all by itself with no decoration or anything. And in fact, I don't think you're encouraged to go there because I don't know how many rads you're allowed to get.
Did they die of radioactive
Yes.
poisoning?
Well, he did too
Oh.
eventually, I believe. Cancer. I don't remember.
Everything that like all these famous people study for ends up killing them.
Galileo.
Yeah.
Let's not look at the sun. Well, it didn't kill him though.
Well, I know, but like quality of life.
But so, you get to work. What are we going to say? I don't have any links to anything from this. I assume you guys have internet at your house. You could just look this stuff up too. I hate to say this, but I think the most interesting thing about her was that her daughter went on to write Frankenstein. Her daughter had an absolute crazy life, but her daughter really didn't have that much influence from her because she died within months of, her daughter was born and basically she died as a result of the childbirth. It took I think a couple months, but she wasn't well. So obviously she didn't have really any social impact on her daughter. It was mostly the father, Godwin, who was pretty weird all on his own. But what we mostly think of is her response to Talleyrand's book that said women should just stay home and not be educated and stuff, and she was furious and wrote within like days a book, The Rights of Women.
How long after, what book was she responding to?
That's in this. This is Wikipedia,
Uh,
and that's probably. So they don't call her a feminist; they call her a proto-feminist.
What does that mean?
like a proto.
It's not quite. So here's.
Yeah, like a prototype or like a protozoan. Yeah.
So it's his report to the French National Assembly.
How? Oh, so it was written within a year of the thing that she was.
I was like, as soon as she read it, she was furious and wrote her response. saying that women should be educated.
The Emancipation of Rights Act was 1792.
But keep in mind that she lives at about the same time as George Eliot and Jane Austen. Are you fans of Jane Austen? You're probably not, but I was forced to read all of Jane Austen's novels.
Oh.
What are some of her books?
Pride and Prejudice,
Emma,
Sense and Sensibility.
Persuasion.
Yeah,
Abbey.
yeah.
That's
Not to be confused with middle something, because that's George Eliot, right?
No,
No, wait.
not
we were
Middlemarch.
there. Middlemarch.
Middlemarch, oh,
That was, Middlemarch is George.
I think
Pride
so.
and Prejudice is the most famous one.
Yeah.
But I remember reading them and thinking, they're all alike. Men are dumb, and women, because of their position, can't just tell them what to do. They have to be super smart and wheedle them into, we really shouldn't give your mother all this much money. What would she use it for? Maybe this much would be okay, because after all, she only has this, and this. Yeah, that's true. Of course, maybe we shouldn't even give her that much, because after all, you could always just give her money whenever she needs it. That's true. Yes,
Gotta make it sound like it's his idea.
She's as if you ever saw the movie My Big Fat Greek Wedding, right, where the mother explains to the daughter who wants to get money for her travel school thing, she wants to go ask her father for it, and the mother explains, no, that's not how you do it. And they sit at the table and they basically, describe how, it'd be wonderful she had this kind of a thing, et cetera, and the father's sitting there and he's, the wife has put exactly the right number of dots in a line, and that she knows exactly how he will now be able to connect those dots. And then once he connects those dots, it's like he has, hey, why don't I pay for your, and he's all thrilled that he, being the good father, has come up with this idea. When, of course, you as the audience are totally aware that, this is collusion. Why is that word such a good word now? Between mother and daughter, that basically set him up. And the mother explains, he might be the head of the family, but I am the neck. But there you go. This is Jane Austen and others of that time. In a sense, they had no political power, no property rights. They're totally at the mercy, essentially, of the menfolk and their thing. I remember in the movie Lincoln, if you saw it, the recent one, not Lincoln Vampire Slayer. Sorry about that. I don't know where the heck that came from. But the good movie, Lincoln, where they had the scene where they were voting on and passing the 13th Amendment to ban slavery. And just the intrigue associated with persuading the number of individuals to vote for that and everything. I forget where I was going with that. However, but the women are behind an awful lot of it too, and but they don't have the power. And one of the things that they were absolutely horrified is if we give, the slaves their freedom, what comes next? Property rights? Oh, crowd, everyone. The vote? No, what happens? We'll give votes to women? And they're all like, everybody's absolutely horrified with the thought, and this is what, 1864, 1865, just before the end of the war. So she's interesting. She's a good representative. By the way, she didn't just write on the rights of, or the vindication of the rights of women. She wrote the same thing, a vindication of the rights of man. So there were two books. That she did. Of men. But she did die, what, in her 30s? It seems, oh my goodness, so awfully young. And childbirth, reading about people's lives in this day, you realize that, man, they had lots of children, but lots of them died before they got really out of even infancy. Did you see that there's a bill, I guess, being presented in our legislature that is going to suggest that women who have addictions to alcohol and drugs will be given medication so that they cannot become pregnant?
What?
It's in today's paper.
That's interesting.
I mean, I guess if you drink alcohol while pregnant, then that can be really damaging to the child.
Right. I kind of see where that could be.
That seems like a serious violation of.
You could just not force them. You could just give them access to birth control too.
Is this sort of thing like a temporary thing, or?
Yes, it would be reversible.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That would be
That makes
a
sense.
ethical violation.
That would take a lot of pain out of young people's lives if they didn't have to worry about if that wasn't a thing.
Shoot, I'm on the.
As long as it's reversible and not forced upon them.
Oh, shoot. This is their Facebook page. I don't know how to negotiate this. Nope, I don't. Oh well. What else? Shelley, Mary Shelley, her daughter, had an incredibly interesting life. But what we might call wicked, in the sense that she had multiple love relationships at the same time, with men that were having multiple relationships at the same time. And again, lots of the children are dying. She ends up with all these children, but only one survived. Percy is the only one that survived. And he didn't live that long. So they were relatively highly educated, but this is also the Romantic period. So let's talk a little bit about Hegel. Get started, because he's kind of the climax of the Enlightenment, or you might argue, what do you mean by Enlightenment? By the way, the most famous article on Enlightenment, right? Have you even read it before? What is Enlightenment? And that's by Kant. So this is you're essentially now in charge of yourself. And not just you as an individual, at the point where you now are aware of how things influence you, and yet you are able to make your own choices, aware of how everything influences you.
So basically just like transcending the human condition would be enlightenment.
Well, it's what Nietzsche would say is this is the next evolutionary step, where you're not merely sheeple or sheep, right? Sheeple. Have you heard that before? Right? You're not merely sheeple. That you know the authorities tell you what to believe and you believe it. Instead, you understand how understanding works, and you understand that people make this stuff up, that it's a dialectical interplay of social forces along with biological forces and physics and so on. You can't just totally ignore so-called reality, right? The contemporary social construction of reality thesis is part of this, will come out of this, where we realize that our social dialectical processes, give and take between different individuals, is what creates a particular sense of your life. As a child, we're constantly working on raising our children and teaching them things, and they incorporate that in their thinking about themselves. But at the point where the enlightenment occurs is now you've gotten to the point where your education is supposed to lead you to the point where you are now in control of your own mind, so that you're the one in charge. You don't have to just follow someone else's guidance. You have to dare to know. But it's a shock. This hits us like a ton of bricks. It's because it at the same time is very liberating, right? Whoa, I'm free to decide for myself. But at the same time, it's scary, because that means that none of the authorities, in a sense, can be trusted. Think of it this way: when we get into the problem of how do you know if a news item is a fact or an anti-fact, or how do you know it's not just concocted by some hacker that wants to instill conflict among Americans or something, right? Well, you actually have no way of really finding out, because the way we find out something is true is by an observation sentence, right? You're looking at your computer, right? You're looking at a computer. You're looking at a computer.
I'm looking at pants.
And you're looking at pants. Are they traveling pants?
I'm gonna probably do some traveling in them.
The sisterhood of the traveling pants? That was a joke. My jokes are terrible though, aren't they? But so, that's okay. Pants are good. In fact, I highly recommend them.
Yeah.
That's, kind of thing. You'll never see me without them, that's for sure. But, how can you tell? We can tell something is true or false by observation. But that's limited to the things right in our immediate vicinity. When I'm listening to somebody tell me what happened in Syria, I'm not there. I can't go investigate any of that stuff myself. In fact, I don't want to. Even if I'm seeing videos of what's happening there, the cameraman and narrator or whatever set up that video to convince me of something. Right? And then if I'm listening to Secretary Kelly or something saying what's going on, well, now I'm listening to his point of view. And by the way, his point of view is probably controlled by those people that are in the chain that told him what they saw, right? So you get very, very complex chains of information, and there's absolutely no way for you to know what's really happening out there. I mean, you can make stuff up totally. I mean, I do that all the time. I tell you stuff in philosophy class that, where the heck did I get that? I don't know.
So basically you're saying being smart hurts because then you don't know if anything is real or not.
It creates a great deal of self-doubt. It should. It should, actually. That's considered one of the good things about getting that kind of an education, is that you lose your confidence. And the ones that have all this confidence in what they believe are scary, because that means that they haven't progressed in their education to the level where they should be doubting the kinds of things that they're absolutely convinced are the case. And why do they do that? Why do they refuse to doubt? Well, because it's painful. It's psychologically painful. Because we don't like to be in doubt. Well, maybe it's a personality thing. Some people are more appreciative of doubt than others may be.
Well, ambiguity is kind of like evolutionarily, like we're supposed to be kind of like not comfortable with it, because that's how we grow, that's how we learn things. Is finding out.
Remember when I visited home, and my dad was aging, I guess somewhere in his 80s, early 80s, I guess. And we went to Mass together one Sunday morning, and as we came home, we left the church, we were in the parking lot, and all of a sudden my dad, who was perfectly calm and even participated in the Mass, he was one of the readers, it was a Catholic church. We came out and he was walking along, and all of a sudden he got angry, and he said, "What I want to know is it true?" By that I interpreted it to mean the entire Christian narrative. And I said, yes. I mean, it wasn't like this is the appropriate time to talk about, well, there's Augustine, there's Aquinas, there's, Martin Luther, what point in history do you want to evaluate what that Christian narrative is, But to me, what was important here was his sense of security in his worldview. And so my answer was yes, and that was the end of the conversation. But he was less angry after that. I remember when we went to our wedding, Don and I. We were married in the Episcopal Church, but one of my friends, Father Bonacorsi, we invited. We would have loved it to have even been a joint service, but the church wouldn't allow that. But so, in any case, he came. But just before the ceremony, he talked with Father Sykes and said to him, they don't even believe in God. And so he changed his sermon from one of encouraging us in our, vows and everything, and how wonderful marriage is, to one instead where I could tell he was making it up on the spot, and he was kind of red-faced, and he was trying to make sure that we understood that believing in God was an important part in being able to stay married. I was like, why did, because that's not even right. It's not, the idea that we had through college experienced doubts of the various positions we had when we were younger is absolutely natural. It doesn't mean that we lost our basic Christianity out of that. There was this evolutionary process. So again, just like with Kant, there's an incremental progress from David Hume, and a lot of David Hume is in Kant, and so you could wonder exactly where it is, a different. It seems like there are absolutely some things that are clear. For example, the categories of judgment, the categories of understanding. Hume doesn't do any of that. Doesn't talk about time and space in that sense. Instead, all of that, that our minds structure our experience, that comes from Kant, and that's the Kantian revolution. But the problem with Kant, as we also discussed, was that he leaves it there. He doesn't explain how that structure occurs. Is it biological that we talk about? One example of that is Gestalt psychology. Is it a cultural thing? Does it come from our language? That seems to be where we went. But who was it that went that direction? Well, there were lots of individuals that did that. So perhaps one of the most important and long-lived, how long did he live? Wasn't it at least 90-something? 82. Okay, well, still 82. That's pretty impressive. Very important literary person. He did some science and stuff. Romanticist. One of the most important works he wrote was Faust. And Faust, have we talked about Faust at all? So there's versions of Faust. So Faust is basically an individual that sells his soul to the devil for whatever he gets for selling it, right? It depends on the version, really. But he sells his soul to the devil, uses what the devil gives him in exchange for that promise of his soul to have fun, basically, or whatever, right? But then, of course, the devil comes back and takes the soul, and so, there's different morals that come from the different versions of Faust, right? So the Christopher Marlowe, Shakespeare time conception of Faust is that, selling your soul to the devil might give you momentary pleasures, etc., but in the long run, you're losing your eternal soul, so it's absolutely horrible. So don't even think it. And if you think about it, who Faust was, it was actually a real individual that they were, I forget his name. Who was the real Faust? It was a real historical character. Or even what this whole thing. I didn't know that he was actually called Faust. So yeah, Christopher Marlowe gives us one version, but Goethe gives us a different one. And the interesting thing is, while Marlowe's Faust ends up going to hell, Goethe's Faust ends up becoming so wise he outthinks the devil. So there's kind of a revision of the idea that education, enlightenment, trumps the old authorities. So if you get the right kind of education, you beat the devil. So that's kind of a romantic, romantic, not in the sense of boy loves girl kind of thing, but in the sense of once you've learned to be your own authority, and you're no longer under the control of the authorities, you think for yourself, right? Now you have to create your own values and live your life according to your romantic impulse. So like if you want to be a pirate, most people would hate you for being a pirate, but actually they'll respect what, Jack Sparrow? He's a really great pirate, right? If you be a revolutionary. They mostly wouldn't like you to be a revolutionary, but if you're really a great revolutionary, very romantic kind of revolutionary, then you become like an icon of the great revolutionary, So it's like if you put your whole heart and soul into something, even if it's not something that we would actually all want everyone to do, right? Wow, you become like an idol, a cultural idol, right? And so that's what romanticism is, right? It could be, of course, loving various different people or something. That could be part of it. Love. I mean, it could be your romantic impulses to love people, but it's in a sense a roman is a novel, right? And so it's your story. So it's the story of the individual who's like dedicated to something, right? Does that make sense?
I think I heard a version of this where it's like all the same, but at the end, instead of like outsmarting the devil, he works his way up until he like essentially is like more powerful than devil, and he's like ruling hell, and like it's all in like his journey to escape, but then he just ends up staying, and then he's like the new devil. I don't know. Maybe it's not a version of it.
Yeah, there's a really odd Russian musical that
It's just interesting because it was like he was all good and he was just trying to escape, and then once he got that power, he like turned into the devil itself.
I don't know. The Master and Margarita. That's it. That is it.
Kailan ka lalaban sa iyong panahon? Ang anak ng bayan, humahampas
I don't know what that is.
panahon. Ikas mo ngayon,
That's not
hingig
it.
ng kahapon.
Hmm. I don't know. So Margarita is the love relationship that Faust has. So that's still another version. Very weird. I watched it one night. It's long. My Russian wasn't good enough to really follow the whole dang thing. So. But so Goethe's version of Faust is like the Enlightenment version of it. But there's another book that he wrote even before Faust. Faust was kind of like a lifelong writing. And like I think the Germans would consider it the greatest lengthy German poem. It's all in rhyme.
Oh, wow.
Pardon?
It's like an epic kind of.
Yeah. Oh, it's like a 2-volume work. And like volume 2 never was really finished. He spent like his whole life working on it bit by bit. But when he was younger, he wrote a book called The Trials or the Sorrows of Young Werther. And it's considered autobiographical. In fact, there's a movie out, Young Goethe in Love.
Durchgefallen.
It says Lekamir Ash, which means kiss my ass. So that's not a good thing to say to your professors when you're.
Das habe ich auch mal geschafft. Aber sonst niemand. Ich weigere mich, dieses lächerliche Geschreibs weiter zu finanzieren. Ich bin Johann. Johann Löwe. Fertig. Ganz war mein Herz an deiner Seite. Jeder Atemzug. Für dich.
Lächerlich. Es ist wahrlich lächerlich, dass Sie nicht an sich glauben.
Scheint es mir nicht zu gefallen, mein Kind. Du wirst Herrn Goethe nicht wiedersehen.
Ich muss zu ihm.
So she and Goethe fell in love. This is historically accurate.
Wäre das jetzt nicht der Augenblick?
But because of financial reasons, the father married her to a richer guy. He was a poor student.
Er wird mich zugesperrt.
So
Verletzungsaktion.
so she married the other guy. And in the story of The Sorrows of Young Werther, he ended up committing suicide.
Did he actually do that in real life?
No, Goethe did not. His roommate did in college.
While in college? Or
But Goethe lived, pardon?
while his friend did while in college?
While in college. They were roommates at the school, in law school, like, and he did shoot himself. So he wrote the story, and in a sense, it's kind of a mixed autobiographical novel about himself, but also about his roommates and others. You know, so like you could read through the book, and you could read through his biography, and you could say, oh, this character was this person, this character, you know, right? You know, you could do that. But he ends up publishing the book, and it becomes the first publishing sensation, and he becomes rich. So he doesn't kill himself. Instead, he publishes the book about the young man killing himself, and you end up there's this incredibly famous painting. I never can remember the name of it. Over the fog. It's not the fog, or the mist. The mist. Mist? That's not. That's the game. Wander above the sea of fog. I don't know if you've ever seen that. So it's there's all kinds of interesting things about it. The idea that you're not seeing the face of the individual. By the way, it's because the artist was terrible at faces. So all of his paintings are like that. All the paintings of the people are looking the other way. It's just hilarious. But the idea, of course, here is that, you know, you've climbed this educational precipice. You're at the top. You know. Now you're looking out over the mist or the fog, which represents all of history, all of civilization, all of culture, everything, right? You're looking out over it. You're the master now. Now what? Right? Now what do you do? Right? You know, being in that position. But so Goethe has this amazing impact of his writing on everyone. He's also into science and some things. But another individual in their ring of discussion is Herder. Annette Herder. And Herder was especially instrumental in pointing out the influence of language itself. And he does a lot of studying about language and how language structures. So the Kantian, thing, our rationality is structured, and that's what structures how we perceive. How is it structured? His answer is language, but he's also involved in education. He's very important in trying to influence the nature of education in the Kingdom of Prussia, and of course Germany is going through lots of changes then, not only because, keep in mind that Napoleon attacks Germany, right, and conquers them, actually, right, and imposes Napoleonic law on them, which does away with all the old nobility classes, etc., right? Imposes kind of the French Revolution on Germany. But then, of course, you famously remember 1812, Napoleon's retreat from Russia, trying to attack Russia in the winter, bad idea. No one that does that succeeds. Hitler tried it. Napoleon tried it. And I think what were the knights with the cross? The
Crusaders?
not the Crusaders, but the shoot, I can't think of it. It was a specific order of knights that tried it and famously lost in the battle of the Nieva with Prince. Teutonic Knights. Nevsky, Alexander Nevsky. The famous movie version of it, by the way, was the one with, oh well. So, Alexander Nevsky. The best music, by the way, is the one by Prokofiev, Sergei Prokofiev, Alexander Nevsky. But, so Napoleon. So 1812, he loses, retreats, never really recovers. I mean, he does get his army back together again, but it's tattered now. And so when they have battles, they end up losing this time, and he ends up being two different islands. He ends up, first one, which one? Is it Elba, or is that the second one? He ends up on two different islands. He's exiled. But he actually just decides, no, I don't want to be exiled, so he has friends pick him up on a boat, and they leave the island, and he gets his army together, and he goes and has another battle.
Infills, right?
Yeah, and this one turns out to be the Waterloo, of course. And so you end up with him finally being defeated for good, and then he's put back on another island. I forget which one it is. Corsica was...
He came from Corsica.
He was Corsican. The little corporal, they called him? Well, so because he was actually short, and he always, by the way, it's not just Napoleon that sticks his hand like this in his jacket. Every single military person I've seen a picture of would go like this. That's just weird. But I think Napoleon started it. Right. You familiar with Napoleon, Josephine? Okay. So how did that screw up Germany, though? I mean, because Hegel is born in 1770. Dies in 1831. Remember, Kant's books are coming out in the 1780s, so he's a teenager and is going to school at Tübingen at the time. Tübingen University, still there. In fact, you can take a tour. It didn't get destroyed during World War II because it was so medieval. It didn't have anything worth destroying, I guess. And so a lot of the buildings are still there. It's kind of a great example of what medieval Germany.
Hello, welcome to Tübingen. My name is Magdalena.
And I'm Hannah.
We're exchange students from Poland, and we got to know each other here.
Yeah.
And this is the building where we're studying German language and literature.
Obviously a
We
new
want to show you
building.
Tübingen. Let's go.
I like these tours people give you of it. One of these old buildings has a big statue
Tübingen
of
is so
Hegel
small,
out front.
but there are university buildings everywhere.
This, for example, the new auditorium.
Doesn't look that new.
What city is this?
Tübingen. By the way, it's like very hilly, and the buildings have no elevators, and they're all like tall.
I was just in that area last summer. If I would have
Yes,
known that,
it's so romantic
that
here.
was a thing.
So you have to like walk. You know, like, I guess well maybe they put elevators in since.
We like the German poets like Hesse and Hölderlin.
Hölderlin
Yes, they
was
lived
one
here in
of
this old
Hegel's
university district.
roommates.
In diesem Buch handelt
Hermann Hesse worked in this bookshop, and now we want to take a look inside.
Hermann Hesse was World War II contemporary. I mean, he wrote Stephen Wolf, right? And Siddhartha, and was against
Hermann
the
Hesse
rise of
didn't attend
Hitler,
university.
and the
He trained
Nazis
as a
stopped him
bookseller
from
here.
writing.
That's interesting, because during that time he wrote so many wonderful poems.
Gedichte geschrieben.
Was willst du träumen, es verwirrte Nacht?
Trauman
Ich gab
would
mein
be a
Herz
dream.
in deine schöne Hand. Es ist so voll von ungesagtem Glück. So
Evening
heiß.
speech,
Hast du es nicht gespürt?
evening thoughts,
Mit fremdem Lächeln gibst du mir's zurück.
happiness.
Oh,
Yeah,
Schmerz.
viel Glück, lots of happiness.
Es ist gekühlt.
So yeah, you can like take
It's a
virtual
shame it's such a
tours.
sad poem, but that's how it is with unrequited love.
And you could see Tübingen is a Stift, which means like a seminary. Did I ever tell you about the Stift I saw in Wiesbaden, which was, what was weird about it was Stift means seminary, but in this particular medieval seminary, the church had all of these dead corpses all around. And you know, in English we say stiff. So I was like, stiff basilica? Oh no, that's just wrong. You know, it was just, I don't think you'd be able to find it. But Yeah, I have, actually, I have a little booklet, you know, because, you know, you go into those places, you can buy the little tourist booklets, and has all these, like, gold-encrusted, armored skeletons, you know, lying across the altar or standing up on either side of it, and everything. It's just pretty hilarious. So, pretty fairly normal childhood, kind of lower middle class, if there is such a thing. His father was like a postman or something, but they actually had pictures on the wall of Kant in his family house. So that's interesting. But then he goes to Tübingen, which is a seminary, Lutheran. So this is a Lutheran seminary, right? And he has roommates, and yes, it reminds me of Ron Weasley and Harry and, what's the other guy that's in the same room, in their bedroom? Not Seamus, is it? Longbottom. What's his name?
Neville.
Neville. Yeah. Is Seamus in that room too?
I don't think Neville's in that room.
Yeah, because he's in the same year.
I know he's not, she's not roommates with her.
In any case, you know, I think of, you know, here you go, you know, that you've got Hölderlin, Schelling, Friedrich Schelling, and Hegel are roommates. And Hegel's actually, I think Hölderlin and Hegel are the same age, but Schelling is actually younger. And so it was kind of like the young, blonde, you know, genius, you know, that's younger than his peers, but he's so brilliant, he's already there. And in fact, he's going to become a major philosopher before Hegel. Hölderlin becomes a famous poet, still is.
I'm going to take you on a journey into the human imagination. Back to a time when the values and ideas and dreams of the modern world were
David Tennant here.
Who is it?
It's David Tennant.
200 years ago,
Tenth.
monarchy was falling
Oh.
to the power of people's revolutions. Industry and commerce were becoming the driving forces of existence. And advances in science were changing the way life itself was understood. Artists all over the world were inspired by these times of dramatic change. In Britain, a group of poets and novelists
Well, this is not
pioneered
just about
an
Hölderlin, this is
alternative way
about-
of living and of looking at the world. Among them were John Keats, Lord Byron, and Percy Bysshe Shelley. The enduring power of their writing haunts us to this day and inspires us still with visions of
That was a
eternity.
weird looking book. So that sounds like they're talking about mostly British authors, but Hölderlin would be right in there with that same romantic, powerful change. Ooh, this looks good too. Heidegger. That would be the real Heidegger, or is this a story about Heidegger?
En het drijft weer
That's the real Heidegger.
en kommen auf die andere Seite. Hier aber wollen wir bauen.
So Martin Heidegger
Ströme machen
was a German philosopher. Have you ever heard of him? Heidegger?
Und dann
Yes,
denselben
maybe
jeden
so.
Sommer zu trinken die Tiere, so gehen auch Menschen daran. Man nennt aber diesen den Ister. Schön wohnt er, es brennet der Säulen Lauf und Maas.
So Martin Heidegger died in the 60s, 1960s, was a German professor during Hitler's reign, and was in fact for 2 years the head of the German faculty, and well, actually not that whole time, but because he resigned and fled to his Totenhof or whatever, his cabin up on Dead Mountain, which is Martin Heidegger. Shoot, I can't remember. Is this,
Erinnerung an Martin Heidegger.
Meine Damen und Herren, Martin Heidegger ist heute...
oh, that's her. Ah, Hannah Arendt. She's dead too, of course. But maybe this is.
Karl Rahner, Martin
Nicht aufgestellt wurde, eigentlich meine. Ganz lohnt die Antwort nicht von außen.
So yeah, he had a cabin up in the, I guess they wouldn't call it the Black Forest, but the Alps, but low enough that, you know, it wasn't totally covered with snow all the time. He had a nice cabin. There's a great video of the son explaining where he wrote a lot of his works in that cabin on the desk, and you can look out the window, and how there's a little fountain there that, you know. But so the three that we're looking at were Hölderlin, the poet, Hegel, of course, is the main one here, and Schelling. I haven't mentioned him much except how young he was. But for Hegel, Schelling had the most impact. I don't know how you could rate which of the roommates are going to be most significant. But Schelling, at graduation, goes off to Jena, which is another school, and that's where he becomes a professor. Hegel ends up teaching in private houses as a tutor, and he goes from like one in Switzerland to another one in Frankfurt. But finally his friend Schelling invites him to come to Jena, and he does, and he becomes a professor there too. And they both work together on various things, including a journal of philosophy and things of that sort. Hegel writes a book on Jesus, the nature of Jesus, but then he writes a book on the difference between Schelling and Fichte's philosophies. And Fichte was like the in-between generation. So Fichte, F-I-C-H-T-E, is so if you look at their ages and stuff, he's like, remember Kant was old when he started writing, so even though his books are the ones that are really important and everyone's all talking about, Fichte is responding to Kant and is actively teaching at Jena at the time. And so he's kind of like their adult in the room, kind of philosopher. And his philosophy was incrementally on the way from Kant. The same problem. Kant doesn't solve all the problems. He allows you to continue on doing metaphysics, but and the switch is, okay, now it's all in our heads. How do our heads get the way they are, right? And so he's working on that problem. Schelling works on that problem. And by the way, Schelling's philosophy seems to me to be the very first one, called existential existence philosophy. So let me. Yeah. Or, just get another page. Schelling existence philosophy. But like Kant says, okay, so you've kind of achieved self-understanding, you're no longer under the control of others. So now what? Well, for Schelling, you exist. So now what? Right? So existence philosophy. How do you build a philosophy based on your own existence? But your existence is in nature. And so he's a romantic nature philosopher. So the nature of the world is very important. So you get a lot of appreciation for the way nature does things. We're not totally free. We're embedded in nature. And so you have to understand how nature is. So his most important book still today is considered his book on freedom. This is like the book that people still read today for historical reasons. It's not only interesting, but it's also historically interesting because this is like a point in the development of our understanding of our own freedom. We recognize that things are forced to be the way they are because of science explaining things as cause and effect, right? That's how we interpret things. But at the same time, we like the idea, we feel conflicted over the nature of human freedom. So how do we account for human freedom, right? And if you think about it, once you get to that point where you understand all the influences on you, you've now achieved a freedom from control by those things. Now you are the one that has to make the decision. So you have freedom because of your ability as an understander of what's gone into making you who you are, right? You can still then, of course, try to understand the nature of the world. Do you want to live along with it? Kind of interesting to refer to it as the most titanic work of German idealism, not because of its size, it's only 90 pages. But it anticipates existentialism. In fact, I don't know why they don't just outright call him an existentialist, because he gives it the name, Existenz philosophy, which is just German for it. Don't know how that happened. But Hegel critiques his roommate, his friend, and describes his philosophy as a precursor to Hegel's own philosophy. So the fur flies. Mostly in one direction, because Hegel just knew he was right. But Schelling was pissed off, right? And never really quite got over it. Although, Hegel dies before Schelling. He's in Berlin. He's the head of the Berlin University in 1831. And some say he gets the plague and dies. Others, actually the one I like best, argues that he died really of an ulcer, stomach ulcer.
Why do you like that one the best?
You know, because it's in. Look up Pincard. He's got lots of books out on Hegel, so did you keep that? It's just a really neat biography. When you read a whole biography written by a scholar that gives you so many neat little tidbits, and he basically tells you, oh, okay, so the tradition thinks that he dies of a plague that was in Berlin, but at the same time, no, actually his symptoms were these. You think, oh, okay, so that becomes like my preferred explanation for it.
Right.
Because
Until
of
someone
that.
else with a different book says the same thing, disregarding yours.
Yeah, I'm open to being persuaded. You know, I'm not there. I'm not physically observing, you know, Hegel on his deathbed, etc. And he did drink a lot of coffee.
Is that?
I don't know if that's a good reason for why anyone would get, but he points out what brand name of coffee he drinks. I guess it's still there. I've looked for it like in the commissary and they don't have it. So that's kind of odd. But yeah, in Germany you can still buy that same brand name of coffee. So that's kind of cool. And Hegel does, like there's one quote where he says, there's an awful lot of coffee in this book, you know he drank a lot of coffee while he was writing, you know, the phenomenology of spirit. But so that's the book he writes in Vienna in 1807, which is the same year that Napoleon's forces win the Battle of Vienna. And in fact, Hegel's looking out the window of his room and he sees Napoleon riding by on a horse, on a white horse. Right, Napoleon. And he goes, there goes the world's soul on a horse. Right. What's ein Weltgeist? So we've got lots of different German words that come from this time period. Weltgeist, Zeitgeist, spirit of the times, right? Weltanschauung, which is actually Kant. Kant invents the word Weltanschauung. You know, so the entire picture that you have of your phenomena in place in your culture, in your life, right? So all the meanings associated with it. So it's not just the perceptions that you're experiencing at the moment, but that entire kind of world image that you're experiencing, Kant calls a Weltanschauung. Did I say that right? A weird German word. There it is. You don't even have to look hard. So yeah. So it's not just a particular philosophy. It's like the whole way for Kant. This is the way it's used mostly now. So I wouldn't say that this is wrong. It feels shallow compared to what Kant was using it for, right? So that's kind of cool. But so, yeah, Geist means spirit or ghost.
Like poltergeist?
Exactly. Geist it's just German for, well, that's weird. It's Geist in German, right? But in English we can use like der Heilige Geist is the Holy Ghost, which we also say the Holy Spirit. Used to be the Holy Ghost when I was a kid. Now everyone says the Holy Spirit. Okay? I guess ghost got to be weird.
Too taboo.
Right? Yeah. You know, if you're in a white sheet, you know, it's a ghost. You wouldn't say it's the spirit, I guess. But Geist is the same. It's also mind for Germans. So, hast du von alle guten Geistern verlassen? Are you out of your mind? Right? Have you gone crazy? You know, alle guten Geistern verlassen. You've lost them all, right? You've lost your guten Geister. You've lost all sense. So Geist can be mind, can be spirit, can be ghost. But so when he's talking about the phenomenology des Geist, he's talking about the phenomena of mind or spirit. Right? I don't want that one. So actually, if you're remember phenomena? Phenomena is everything that we experience. The study of the phenomena of spirit or mind, right? So what Hegel's doing with this book is studying the experience we have of ourselves. And it evolves. So it starts off as an infant. But of course, what? What does a child experience? Nobody could really ask a child, because the child would just go, or whatever, right? But so we have to make it up. We imagine what the child feels. And Freud will do the same thing and come up with goofy stages, right? You know, the anal or oral stage, everything goes in the mouth first. If you're an observant parent, you see that. So then we discover other things. I still remember every one of our children discovering poo at a certain point, which is why everybody knows what poo tastes like. Sorry about that, but it's just true. And then you just discover other things. So Freud comes up with stages. Hegel doesn't talk about that. He talks primarily about just, the initial stage is one of just kind of the facticity of our experience. There's a smiley face, mom, but for Hegel, you reach a stage, a different stage, when you get to essentially the terrible twos, and you can say no. When the child says no, so you tell the child, come here, and the child says no. The child has now reached a significant development where it can imagine the opposite of whatever. It discovers negativity. It can say no, not that, right? And then you get to the point where consciousness becomes self-consciousness. So consciousness is like, I'm aware, as an infant, you're aware of things. Of course, you go through the period where you learn negativity, but the next stage is where you become aware of yourself. And this is where today we would say you pass the mirror test. So So when you look in the mirror, you don't just see stuff in the mirror, you see yourself. You know that's you. You have a concept of yourself, and that's where we'll pick up next class, which is the text that we had, by the way. Exactly. That's exactly the place in the text that we have. It's where consciousness becomes aware of itself as a consciousness. Self-consciousness arrives on this. So that will be cool. Who do you think is by the way, did I forget which was the right quiz question last class? Did I ask whether you thought Elon Musk's car was art?
Yeah.
I did. Okay, that was right. Okay, so for today though, how about I ask, who do you think could be considered Faust today? Who sold themselves, their soul to the devil for powerful ability? That's a good question. If you were going to rewrite the story Faust today, who would you think of as the character?